Shalom Aleichem, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of Kol Neshama. Today we are learning the fifth Perek of Pesachim. We start learning the halachos of the Korban Pesach. Um, if you can see behind me, this is not my usual background because I am sitting in Yerushalayim Rei Kodesh by the coastal, like that coastal tunnel thingy, on the inner on one of the inner rooms, and I am recording this year here tonight. Baruch Hashem, we made it to Eretz Yisrael today, um, and I'm able to record this year at the Kosel. Very cool. Um, Today's shir is the Ilay Nishmas Michal Yosef ben Nachum David. Our Nachum ben Simcha Cohen, Yishol Mordechai ben Shepsel, Baruch Yisrael Shmuel Leib, and Binyan Moshe ben Yosef. May the Neshama shall have an aliyah. And before Shlomo for Ad Sarbas Leah, Chana Pesach Basyanta, Yisrael ben Rachel Leah, Rachel Bas Pesach Zelda, Abba Yitzchak ben Risha, Chaya Bas Dober Bela. Before Shlomo B'Sor Shar Chol Yisrael. I apologize if there's any background noise. This is not my private space. This belongs to God's Klal Yisrael. So here we go. Um, there's a lot to say about Korbanos. We're just gonna skip the intro and go right into the Mishnayos. Okay, Tamid Nishchot. Okay, so when is the Korban Pesach brought on Erev Pesach? So, as you know, maybe you don't know, but if you do know, every day you had a Tamid Shal a Korban Tamid Shal Shachar, Korban Tamid Shal Ben Arbayim. The Korban Tamid in the morning was the Korban that opened up the avoda of the day, and the Tamid of the afternoon was the one that was the last Korban brought at the end of the day, and it closed up the Beis Hamikdash at the end of the day. No other Korbanos were allowed to be brought after the Tamid Shal Ben Harbaim, with the one exception, and that was the exception of the Korban Pesach, because the Korban Pesach was brought after the Tamid was brought. Okay, so Tamid Nishcha b'Shmona v'Mechsa v'Kareh b'Tesha v'Mechsa, and a regular day of the year, the afternoon Tamid was slaughtered 8.5 hours after the sunrise, 8.5 hours into the day. So we know that there's always 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours at night, and each hour is divided into Shalos Manios, they differ in length. And so at 8.5 hours after sunrise is when the afternoon tummy was shechted, and it was brought on it was brought on the mizbeach at 9.5 hours. Okay, but Arve Pesachim nishcha b'sheva v'mechsa v'kareh b'shmona v'mechsa. And Erev Pesach, when you needed more time to complete all their korbanos, then the tamid was brought an hour earlier. It was shechted at 7.5 hours. It was brought on the mizbeach at 8.5 hours. Ben b'chol ben b'Shabbos, and that was true whether it was on during the week or on Shabbos. Because even though less time would be needed on Shabbos because there are no private korbanos being brought, weekdays then the regular schedule was still kept. That Erev Pesach that there would be shechted on shechted the Korban Talmud at 7.5 hours and Makafid at 8.5 hours. The only exception was Chal Erev Pesach Lios Erev Shabbos with Erev Pesach fall Friday, Nishchat b'Sheish v'Mechsa v'Kara b'Sheva Mechsa. And the Talmud was shechted as the earliest possible time is 6.5 hours after sunrise, which is a half an hour after Chatzos, and brought on the Mizbeach at 7.5 hours. Pesach Acharav, in all these cases, the Korban Pesach was brought after the time. Why was Friday Why was Friday Erev Pesach done that way? Because you had to have the whole thing roasted in time for Shabbos, and you needed time to get that all done because that was not Dochas Shabbos. Um, okay, there are four parts the to a korban. And we just finished learning Zvach. We should know this, but there's shechita, there's kabbalah, there's halacha, and there's rika. So shechita was when you slaughtered the animal. Kabbalah is we received the blood in a klei shares, and halacha, but you brought the blood to the mizbeach, and zrika is when you sprinkled it onto the wall of the mizbeach. All those avodas had to be done in the proper order, and um, the last three had to be done by a Kohen. Shechita could technically be done by a non-Kohen. So, Mishnah Beis, HaPesach sheshachtu shelo lishma. The Pesach, Korban Pesach that a person slaughtered not for its own sake, it had a different intention about. The kiba v'hilich v'zark shelo lishma. Or if you received the blood in a vessel, he brought the blood to the mizbeach or threw it onto the mizbeach, not for its own sake. Oh, lishma, lishma, or if it began one of these avodas for its own sake, for the Hashem Pesach, and he continued the same avodah for not for its not for Pesach, but for some other korban. Oh, shalom, lishma. Or if he did the reverse, he started one of the avodas not for a Pesach and then continued it for a Pesach. Puzzle. In each of these cases, whether before the one or just part of one, for the sake of a different korban, then the Korban Pesach is puzzle. It's invalid. What is the example of starting an avoda for its own sake and continuing it not for its own sake? One began the avoda for the sake of the Pesach and continued it for the sake of the shlamim. What is an example of starting an avoda not for its own sake and continuing for its own sake? The same shlamim b'shem Pesach. One begins the avoda for the sake of shlamim and continued it for the sake of the Pesach. Mishnah Gimel. I don't feel well. Shachtu shlo la'achlov. If he slaughtered a Pesach with the kavana that it would be for those who are not able to eat it, or too sick or too weak to eat it. Or for those not registered for it, they are reilim l'tameim, or for uncircumcised people or tamei people who are not allowed to eat a Pesach. Puzzle, then the Pesach is puzzle. Because it has to be shechted and slaughtered slaughtered and marketed for people who are registered for it and who are roy to eat. If it's not, then it's possible. However, if he slaughtered it for those who are able to eat it, and for those not able to eat it, the nuyav for those registered for it and for those not registered for it, the mulim ulerelim for circumcised people and uncircumcised people, the tameim with tahorim, or for tamei people and tahor people, kosher, it is kosher even as long as it's slaughtered for the registered people, then it is then it's good even if it's slaughtered for disqualified people as well. Shachtu korban chatzos pasul if he slaughtered it before, if he shechted the korban before, if he shechted it before chatzos, it is pasul. Mishum shenem ben harbaim, because it is stated that the tzibur shall slaughter it in the afternoon, right? Shachtu kodam l'tamid kosher. If he slaughtered it after chatzos but before the afternoon tamid, it is kosher. B'vad shehei echad b'maris b'damo ad sheyizra kedam hatamid. Except that someone should continue to stir the blood with the Pesach until the blood of the tamid is thrown on the mizbeach, and only then throw the blood of the Korban Pesach on the mizbeach. kosher. However, if the blood of the Pesach was thrown on the Mizbech before that of the Tamid, then the Korban Pesach is still kosher. Um, okay, now there's a pasuk in, I think it's Mishpatim, maybe Lo Shishchat Al Chametz Dam Zivchi. Maybe it's later than that. No, it's gotta be later than that. It's Perek Lamed Dalet. It's Kisisa. That you should not slaughter the blood of my offering upon leavened food, meaning that a person is usher to it's usher to shech the Korban Pesach when there's any chametz in the person's possession, or anyone or chametz belonging to anyone who in the group who is bringing the korban. So let's see, Mishnah Dalet. Hashoche es Pesach al chametz over below sase. One who shechs the Korban Pesach while there's chametz in his possession, or in the possession of anyone in his chabura, he's over the lav of of lo shishchat al chametz dam zivchi. Rabbi Yehuda says afatamid, one also violates the isser by slaughtering the afternoon. The Talmud shall be on Habayim of Erev Pesach while possessing chametz. Um, yeah. Rabbi Shimon says that Pesach ba'arba asar l'shmo chayev. If a person slaughtered the Korban Pesach on the 14th of Nisan for its own sake, while owning chametz, he is chayev for transgressing this iser. But if he slaughters it not for its own sake, he is not chayev, since slaughtering a Pesach for the sake of a different type of offering makes the Pesach invalid. Rishon does not consider this to legally be an act of slaughter. Therefore, a person does who does so does not violate the isser to slaughter the Pesach or possessing chametz. Okay, B'shar kol zvachim ben lishman ben shlo lishman pot. However, if in regard to all other offerings that a person shechs on the afternoon of Erev Pesach while possessing chametz, whether he slaughters them for their own sake or not for their own sake, he is pater. Because in Erev Pesach, the issur to slaughter to shecht while having chametz applies only to the Korban Pesach. During the festival of Pesach, the person with chametz in his possession shechs a korban, a Pesach for its own sake. He is pater from this issur because it is not a valid offering. There's only 2 days a year you can bring a Pesach offering. One is the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon, and for special circumstances, the 14th of Iyar in the afternoon. If you brought a Korban Pesach during Chol Hamoed, for example, it's not. He's not over the law, but the whole thing was puzzled altogether. However, if he slaughters it during the Chag, not for his own sake, he said, but he shechted it for a shlamim, he is chay, because in that case, it is a kosher shlamim, korban shlamim. Ah, my throat's very dry. Thank you so much for the water. I'm going to make a bracha by the kosel. Huh? Okay. And for all of the other karbanos that a person slaughters on Pesach, while only chametz, whether he shechs them for their sake or not for their sake, he is chayiv for violating this iser, because all the other karbanos are kosher, even if they are not done for the shame of that korban. Except for a chatas offering that was shechted not for its own sake, which is possible. Therefore, one is not chayiv for shechting a chatas in such a manner during Pesach while possessing chametz. Okay. Mishnah Hey, HaPesach Nishcha B'Shalosh Kisos. Now we're getting into the the the, the procedure. The Pesach, the Korban Pesach, was shechted in three different groups. Shenemar, the shachtu aso kol kahala das Yisrael. The pasuk says in Parshas Bo that the entire assembly of the congregation of Israel shall shecht the Pesach. So you have three words over here. You have kahal, the Edav, Yisrael. You have three terms. You have assembly, congregation, and Yisrael, which to Chazal deduce from this that there has to be shechted in three groups. Dichnasa kas Rishona, Harishona Nismalis Azar. The first group entered the 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 Azara of the Beis Hamikdash until the Azara was filled. Now the Dulas Azara, and then they closed the gates of the Azara. Taku Hariya V'Taku. During the avodah, the Kohanim sounded a tekiah on trumpets. On trumpets. הכהנים העומדים בשורות בידיהם בזכרי כסף ובזכרי זהב. The Kohanim stood in rows that stretched from the place where the animals were shechted until the Mizbeach. In their hands were silver bowls and gold bowls, which they used to bring the blood of the offerings to the Mizbeach. Shua shekula kesef, shua shekula zav. One row was all Kohanim with silver bowls, and one row was all Kohanim with gold bowls. Although Hayim Rav, that they did not mix silver and gold bowls in the same row, because a complete row of one type looks nicer. Below Hayim Shulayim, and the bowls did not have wide bases, but pointed bottoms, because if they had wide bases, Shemet Yenichum Yikarish Hadam. And Kohanim might put them down on the ground, and the blood would congeal and thereby become possible from throwing onto the mizbech. You couldn't throw congealed blood onto the mizbech. Mishnah Vav Shachar Yisrael. See, Yisrael was not going. He could shech the Pesach if he wished. As an offering, the Kohen may be shechted by anyone. The Kibel HaKohen, and the Kohen at the head of one of the rows stretched to the Mizbeach would receive the blood in a bowl, and he would give the bowl to his fellow Kohen, and they do a whole procession. He'll like passing it around, and that Kohen would give it pass to another Kohen, and so on, until it reached the end of the Kohen at the end of the row next to the Mizbeach. The Kabel as Hamali Maxi as Harekan. Each Kohen would accept a full bowl of blood from the Kohen next to him to one side, and return an empty bowl that he would give to the Kohen standing to his other side. Kohen HaKaravetz Mizbeach Zarka Zerika Achas Keneged HaYesod. The Kohen who is nearest to all the Mizbeach would then throw the blood once onto the wall of the Mizbeach at a spot opposite the base of the altar. Okay. On the spot opposite the Mizbeach. Mishnah Zayin. Yatzda Kas Rishona Nechnasa Kashnia. When they finished bringing the Karbanos, the first group left the Azara, and the second group entered and made their Karbanos. Yatzda Shnia Kunifasa Shlishis. When the second group left, then the third group entered and made their Karbanos. This procedure, the second and the third groups, was just like the procedure of the first group, which was described in the previous Mishnah. They all followed the same procedure. Okay, during the akrava of the Korban Pesach, karu es halel, when each group was shechting their kabbanas, the Levim sang Hallel. In Garmu Shanuf, they finished Hallel before the group finished slaughtering their karbanos. They repeated it, Vimshanu, Shileshu, and if when they finished repeating it, and the group still did not finish, and they recited it a third time. Although this was the halacha, they never actually recited it a third time, because there are many kohanim performing the the avoda, and they were quickly. The Kohanim was reason, and there was never a reason to sing Hallel a third time for any other group. So Yehuda Omer, Yehuda says, "Mi mehem shal kas shlishis lo higia lahafti ki yishma Hashem." The third group never even reached the paragraph of Yahafti, which is halfway through Hallel. Mifnei she'ima she'amim. What? Because the third group really only had a few people, and therefore they would have finished quickly. Everyone wants to be in the first two groups. They get roasting their kabbanos. Imagine you showing up the last guy, and you're showing up right before this man in order to cook the korban. The guy's wife probably not be so happy. Mishnah Ches. The procedure of the Korban Pesach that was followed on weekdays, as we described previously, was also followed when Erev Pesach was on Shabbos. Alesha Kohanim Medichim Es Hazara Shelo Kirazach. However, the Kohanim would rinse the floor of the Beis Hamikdash courtyard on Shabbos after they finished bringing the Korban Pesach, which was against the wishes of the Chachamim, who maintain that the floor should not be cleaned on Shabbos. And Yehuda Omer, Yehuda says, after the Kohanim finished throwing the blood of all the Korban Pesach, Kosh Hayim Mamali Midam HaTaruvis, the Kohen would fill a cup from the intermingled blood of all the offerings that had accumulated on the floor, and throw it once on the wall of the Mizbeach. In that event, in the rush to bring the karbanos, the blood of any offering had spilled and had not been thrown on the altar, on the Mizbeach, it would now be thrown as part of this cup, which contains blood from all the karbanos brought that day. And that was not, that the Chachamim did not agree with Yehuda on that, because they cannot mix in blood together. It doesn't work. You can't do that. Mishnah test. Keitza tolin umafshitin. Once you were marked with the blood, then you had to skin off the skins to remove certain parts of the animal that were brought on the Mizbeach. So, Keitza tolin umafshitin. How did they hang their offerings and skin them? On kulius shel barzel hayikfuim bekisalim ovamudim. Iron hooks were built into the walls of the Azara and in pillars that stood in the Azara, the Beis Hamikdash. Shebehen tolin umavshitim, and on these hooks they would hang the karbanos and skin them. Chol mi she'ein lo makom lislos ulahavshi. And for anyone who had no place to hang his korban and skin it, but the hooks were occupied by other karbanos. Maklos takim chalakim hayusham. There were thin, smooth sticks of wood there. Meniach al ksefo v'al kesef chavero, and a person would face his friend and rest one end of the stick on his shoulder and the other end on his friend's shoulder. And he would hang the offering from the stick and skin it. Lezer says, Arba Asr Shchaliot Shabbos, if the 14th of Nisan fell on Shabbos, when the sticks could not be used because they were muksa, a person who could not find an available hook would place his hand on his friend's shoulder, and his friend would place a hand on his shoulder, the solar mouth sheet, and they would hang the korban from their arms and skin it. And the last Mishnah for today, Mishnah Yer Karuv V'Hotzi Emuruv. After the korban was skinned, and the owner tore open its abdomen and removed its sacrificial parts, meaning the fats and organs that are burned on the mizbeach. Nasnu b'mages ve'ektivan al gabi mizbeach. You put them in a bowl in order for a kohen to take and burn them on the mizbeach. Okay, so when each of these three groups finished making their karbanos, everyone would take the meat of the korban to their place in Yerushalayim, in the old city, within the walls, and they would roast it. So the Mishnah describes what was done when Erev Pesach was on Shabbos, when they could not carry the meat home, because the Isser to carry outside on Shabbos. So Yatsa Kashi Shona Yashlo Harabayas. When Erev Pesach was on Shabbos, the first group left the court, left the Chatzar after making their kabbalas and sat on the Temple Mount on the Harabayas. Shnia B'chol Bechel, and the second group, after finishing their kabbalas, left the Azara and sat in the Chel. The Chel was an area that stretched 10 amas from the outer walls of the Ezra's Nashim. It was surrounded by a low partition called the Soreg. Okay. The Ashlishis b'Mekoma Omedis, and the third group, after finishing their kabbalas, they stood in place in the courtyard. Chashecha Yatsu Mitzalo as Pesachim. When it got dark and Shabbos was over, and all three groups left and roasted their their Korban Pesachs. And what is good to learn this Perek right at the coast of Maravi in Yerushalayim, they be zocher to makruf the Korban Pesach, the Ito of Ismano this year in Yerushalayim Kodesh. We will continue tomorrow with the next Perek. Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful day.